For the next presentation, joining us via link from Boston is Abliva CEO Ellen Donnelly. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, thanks, Cecilia. It's fun to be here, and thanks for offering us the opportunity to present. So today I'm going to tell you about Abliva. The company is focused on targeting the powerhouse of the cells. These are your mitochondria. And we're hoping that that will help improve the lives of patients with primary mitochondrial disease, or PMD. We also call this Mito disease, so we'll refer to it like that in the presentation. So Abliva is focused on becoming a leader in mitochondrial medicine. And you may think that sounds strange from a small company located in Lund, Sweden, but I think we have all of the framework necessary to do that. So I'm joined by a team of experienced individuals with over 20 years of experience in mitochondrial medicine and developing drugs for patients with mitochondrial dysfunction. Our company is located both in Boston. We have Abliva Inc. here, and I reside in Boston, and in Lund, where the head of the operations is located. Another thing that differentiates us from other companies is that we have a full R&D organization. That's important because we have a research group at Lund University that has the opportunity to run experiments for us. Anything from experiments that support our portfolio to experiments to find new drugs to bring into our portfolio. So that's a pretty unique component that we have within the company. We also have a development group led by Magnus Hansen, our CMO, who's responsible for putting our drugs into patients and into the clinic. We also, in the future, hope to build a commercial organization. So that's the part of the organization that will take the drugs to the patients. It's the sales and the marketing people you need on the ground to sell your drugs to patients with these diseases. Another thing that's interesting about our company is we're focused on a rare disease. This is important because it brings a lot of opportunities as far as regulatory assistance, tax credits, and everything. And the drugs that we have in the portfolio are first-in-class drugs. So that means that we're leading the way. There are no competitors that have drugs with similar mechanisms of action. And I say drugs because we have multiple drugs. We have 2 drugs that will be in the clinic next year. And again, that's pretty differentiating. Most companies our size only have 1. We're also publicly traded in NASDAQ, Sweden. Our market cap today is around 25 million US. So what do we got at Abliva? We have a lead program called KO-1333 that's 1 study away from approval. And I don't put that lightly. So this is a late stage asset that, if positive in this next study, will be able to be marketed to patients with these primary mitochondrial diseases. Again, this drug is targeting a rare disease, Mito disease, and it has a huge amount of potential. When we run the numbers, it looks like it could be over $1 billion blockbuster drug. We now have efficacy data in patients, and we have strong safety across multiple studies. So this drug really is ready to go into that final confirmatory study. We have another asset in our portfolio, NV354. This one's exciting to us because it was actually discovered by the scientists at Abliva. And this one will start in the clinic next year. This one is targeting a different PMD. It's called Leigh syndrome, and this affects small children. And as I mentioned, we have discovery efforts to bring more important drugs into the portfolio. So you may ask me, you've probably never heard of Mito disease. So let's just spend a couple minutes talking about what that is. Mito disease is a devastating rare disease with severe symptoms and continuous deterioration. These patients have multisystemic problems, so many of their symptoms are involved. They may have heart issues, they may have a problem walking, they could have sensory deficits, have a hard time hearing. They often have a reduced quality of life and a reduced lifespan. There are no approved drugs for these patients. They take things to get them through the day, but that's it. They have nothing for their disease. And often they're told, oh, I'm sorry you have Mito disease, but there's really nothing you can do about it, which has to be very frustrating for our patients. This disease can either be caused by mutations in your nuclear DNA or your mitochondrial DNA. But any of the mutations in the DNA affect the mitochondria. So they make it so your mitochondria don't work. And that's a big problem because the mitochondria are found in almost every cell in your body except for your red blood cells. So you can imagine if you have a mutation affecting your mitochondria, you're going to have issues throughout your body. So I mentioned that we have 2 clinical stage programs. These both have unique mechanisms. So today I'll highlight both of them. We'll talk first about KO-1333. This is the drug that has a pivotal start upcoming. It's a first in class. We call it an NAD plus NADH modulator. And that's important because when your mitochondria don't work well, you get a lot of production of NADH, which is a coenzyme in your body, but you don't get any production of NAD+, and that's what causes the problem. So our drug KL1333 actually brings that back into the normal range to make these patients feel better. And we are targeting with this drug multisystemic mitochondrial disease. So this journey to patients has been informed by patients. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of at Abliva is our focus and our commitment to the patients. Throughout this journey, we've spoken to patients closely, working with advocacy groups, individual patients, et cetera, to understand their disease and understand what they need from a new therapeutic. At the same time, we're obviously studying our drugs. And here you can see a slide that we've shown previously where we looked at the effect of KL1333 in patient cells. And that was a really important experiment because that's using cells that come from patients. And we're seeing what our drug does when you administer it to those cells. And what we found out is it increased the energy in the cells. Not only did it increase the energy, but it also increased the number of mitochondria in the cells. And that was super important because that could allow us to have symptomatic, I feel better every day because I have more energy to do things, and disease modifying effects by the creation of more mitochondria. So that was super important research that was done in the preclinical setting, just using patient cells. So we continued to develop that relationship with patients and continue to talk to them. And then we did another study because we found when we talked to patients, what they said was the primary thing that bothers them with their disease and the thing that they were hoping we could help is their fatigue. And so we went, after talking to all those patients, and we went to the FDA and we said, how can we study this? We want to study fatigue in these patients because we think KL1333 does a great job of improving the energy in the cells. And we think that that could translate to the patient situation of fatigue. And so that was a long conversation with the FDA through a number of meetings. And at the end, we decided to validate a fatigue endpoint using patients and having them help us understand their disease and how they are impacted by fatigue. We ended up validating the first PMD-specific endpoint in the industry. The reason this is important is because we believe that this is how our drug works, and we want to put it in clinical studies. But the problem with some of the clinical endpoints that you see, they aren't specific to the patients being studied. So often we use the same clinical endpoint in a variety of different patient conditions. And that often leads to a bad result. So what we did here is we modified the fatigue endpoints that exist already to be specific to the PMD patient population. That's been really important work that we've done, and that's been done in collaboration with the FDA. So we're super excited to have that first PMD specific endpoint. So then recently we got some patient data, which is even more exciting for all of us. So we ran a cohort of patients in the UK. This cohort was run during COVID, so you can imagine it was particularly challenging to get a PMD patient who suffers from this devastating disease into the hospital when they're COVID patients in all of the halls. But we managed to do it, and huge thank you to the patients that volunteered for this because it was a difficult time to be participating in clinical studies. So we had 8 patients in this study. 2 of them received placebo and 6 of them received drug. And that's a small group, but a mighty group, I must say. They were dosed for 10 days with the lowest dose of drug that we had, which was 50 milligrams. So small group, 10 days of dosing, low dose of drug. But it was interesting because everything seemed to kind of line up. So we had 3 endpoints that we looked at in that study. You can see one of them here, one of the fatigue endpoints. And they all seem to show a very big difference between the placebo patients and the patients that had taken our drug. And that difference was actually clinically meaningful. That's a term we use in drug development when we're trying to understand if the difference actually matters to the patient. And in this case, in all 3 endpoints, it appeared to matter to the patients. So that was nice. Then we also showed an impact or a correlation between the efficacy that we saw and the amount of drug the patients had in their body. So if a patient had more KL1333 in their blood, they had a better response to the clinical outcomes. So that's important because it shows that we think the drug is causing the effect when you see that type of relationship. So that was super exciting to us. In that study, we also showed target engagement. The reason that's important is we need to know that our drug is doing what we think it's doing. And that was confirmed as well. So a really important study to give us a lot of confidence going into the next study. So now we're one study away from being available to patients to buy this drug at the pharmacy and take it on a daily basis. So I'm just quickly going to show you what that study looks like. This is a randomized study, placebo-controlled. A few more patients are going to get the drug than don't get the drug. That makes it easier and makes it more attractive for the patients because they know that their chances are higher that they'll get the drug in our study. We're going to take patients with Mito disease. It needs to be multisystemic, but these patients also need to have chronic fatigue, and they need to have mitochondrial myopathy or muscle weakness associated with their disease as well, because those are the two things we're going to study. And you can imagine if we get a bunch of patients in our study that don't have fatigue, then it isn't going to have a nice outcome. So we want patients that first have genetically confirmed disease, then also have chronic fatigue and muscle myopathy. They're going to be treated with 2 pills a day for 12 months, and we're going to enroll anywhere from 120 to 180 patients. And as I mentioned, we're looking at two things in our primary endpoints. The first is fatigue, and that's from both the mechanism in the patients, and then 30 seconds sit to stand. This tests the muscle function, the muscle weakness in the patients. And that's a neat test, super easy for the patients. They just put their hands on their chest and then stand up and sit down as many times as they can within 30 seconds. So that's our second primary endpoint. The nice thing about having two primary endpoints is that you get 2 shots on goal. So if one of these is positive, we'll have a positive study. If the other is positive, that will count as a positive study as well. So a nice way to run a study with the 2 opportunities to show impact. The other good thing about having 2 primary endpoints is it makes it, if we hit on both of them, it obviously makes the label broader and makes us able to treat more patients with this devastating disease. So this drug is has a pretty substantial market behind us. We talk about rare diseases and we talk about small patient populations, but the size of the population really, in this case, is big enough to drive quite a large commercial opportunity. So you can see on the left side here, a commercial opportunity of $1 billion, and that's with some pretty conservative assumptions, which you can see on the right. So a great opportunity for the drug to bring money to Abliva. So I talked to you about KO-1333. I'm excited to present NV354 today because that study just got green-lighted to move into the clinic next year. This is another first-in-class drug. So again, we're paving the way with an energy replacement therapy. And this, as I mentioned, is going to target children. So NV354 is going to target a Mito disease called Leigh syndrome. This syndrome brings severe multi-organ deterioration to the patients. They usually live less than 5 years. And it's, again, another rare disease. We're hoping that our energy replacement therapy will modify their disease progression, not only make them feel better, but make them live for longer. This asset's now clinic ready, as I mentioned, following an MHRA review, a review by the regulators in the UK to make sure the study was ready to move, or the compound was ready to move into clinical studies. So what does NV354 do? This drug has a different mechanism of action. It's really a bit simpler than the last one. So your mitochondria have 5 complexes within their electron transport chain. And usually one of them in many of these diseases is actually dysfunctional. And that's what happens. This doesn't work, and so you can't get the electron transport chain just isn't able to function. So we've designed a drug. It's called a prodrug because it can get into the cells, a prodrug of succinate. So this drug gets into the cells, and basically it starts in complex 2 of the electron transport chain. So it basically ignores complex 1. So if complex 1 doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. Our drug comes straight into complex 2, goes through the electron transport chain, and produces the energy that your mitochondria need to do for you to be helped. Again, disease modifying potential on this. It'll both protect the mitochondria and the loss of organ function, and it could prevent complications by acute energy crisis. It's an innovative prodrug approach, and it will enter the clinic quite soon. What does the drug do? Well, as I mentioned, we use patient cells with KO-1333. We also use patient cells with this program. And you can see over on the left that when you gave the drug, we had improved mitochondrial function, both in our control cells and in our Leigh patient cells. On the right, you can see something else important with this program. It gets into the brain. So this was the first set of experiments we do, is we try to look at the general characteristics of the drug, and we look at the properties. So through these early experiments, we found out that the drug had good oral bioavailability. It distributes in the brain quite well, and it has good tolerability and toxicology. It also, we've confirmed, does bypass complex 1 in the mitochondrial electron transport chain, and it did normalize the function of cells from Leigh patients. So that was all great data. Then we went a step further and just got some data out of a study that we did with a collaborator in Barcelona, where we looked at animals that had a dysfunction in complex 1 of the mitochondrial electron transport chain. And we showed that in those animals, if you give them NV354, you get a decrease in neuroinflammation in the brain. We saw a delay in the presence of motor symptom issues, and we saw improved weight gain in the animals. So all of that was super exciting for us and the NV354 program. So as we've discussed, what we've been doing for the past few years is putting together the preclinical data package. And in that discovery, we generated a whole lot of data, and we wanted to make sure that that data was sufficient to support a clinical study in healthy volunteers. So on September 1st, we took it to the regulators in the UK. This is called the MHRA. And we had a discussion with them about some of the data and what they thought about how we had characterized the response. And they were in support of all of our questions. And so at the end of the meeting, they agreed that the non-clinical data package did support the initiation of a phase 1 study. So that was a huge milestone for the program, and a great kudos to the team that has developed this program basically since the bench. So this team is on track for a phase 1 study start in 2022. Right now, we're focused on a number of things, but the key focus for getting it into the clinic is that we'll have to make the drug product. We already have the substance, but now we need to make the product, and luckily that's a pretty easy process. And then we'll put together our clinical trial application. This is just an assembly of all of the preclinical documentation suggesting that the drug is safe and could be efficacious in patients. That will lead to our first in human study, again in healthy volunteers first in 2022. So that's the company. I think you've heard a few things today about why I think Abliva has a great chance at becoming a global leader in mitochondrial medicine. We have an experienced team. We have offices in both Boston and Lund. We have full R&D capabilities and the intent to build commercial. We have a portfolio of assets, extremely differentiating to have 2 programs in the clinic. The nice thing about that is we have a study that's going to start and be quite long. The KL1333 study will go for 2 years. And it makes it difficult if you only have 1 study. But we have other assets in the portfolio and other things that are moving forward. And so that gives us an opportunity to continue to come to events like this and talk to investors about all the news that we're generating on our programs. And then, as I mentioned, just in follow-up, we're publicly traded on NASDAQ Sweden. So there's a great opportunity to invest in the company if it's something that's of interest. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Ellen, for a very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions for you. Like you mentioned here, Abliva has a couple of assets, and I actually wanted to start by asking you about one of the assets called Neurostat, and if you could give our viewers a bit of an update on that one.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for asking about that. That's an exciting program. I think it's close to all of our hearts. I actually worked in TBI when I was at Pfizer as well. So I know we all have an interest in traumatic brain injury. Unfortunately, that topic is off target, off strategy for Abliva now. As I told you, we're very focused on primary mitochondrial diseases or mito diseases. And so TBI is a bit different. But the nice thing is that the drug, as you know, has been included in a program called the Precision Medicine Program, and that's being run by Track TBI and funded by the Department of Defense. So that's a great opportunity to continue to move that program forward. That's dependent upon other phases being completed, but we're hopeful that Neurostat will still be included in that in the next year or so. There are other opportunities for that program as well as we look and talk to potential partners to make sure that that asset has the best opportunity to be successful. And that's really important to all of us, especially the team that has been with it for a long time.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I know a lot of viewers have been interested in an update. And if we then look more at Abliva's strategy for protecting these assets that you have in terms of patents and orphan drug designation and how this compares to your competitors, how would you describe that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I looked at before I joined Abliva, because the protection of your estate is very, very important, especially as drugs progress into later stage development. And I think that that's something that biotech companies don't often do because it is quite expensive. And I think Abliva has a very, very strong patent estate. The team has focused on that. We have a number of experts that help us making sure that our patent strategy is strong and robust. And so the two lead assets have got a great patent estate. They both have composition of matter, and then we continue to try to put additional layers of protection on them through secondary patents. And that's an ongoing process that we really focus quite a bit on. The other way these assets are protected is obviously through orphan drug designation. And that, as you know, is something that a company can apply for if we believe that we're working in the rare disease space. The nice thing about orphan drug designation is it brings a lot of things. It brings a lot of opportunity to the company. So it allows us to go for frequent regulatory advice. We can get tax credits. We can get a quick approval. And so that's been important. So the lead asset KL1333 has both ODD designation in the EU and the US. That's another level of protection because when you get that ODD designation and you get approved to market, it gives you 10 years in Europe or 7 years in the US of exclusivity. So that protects us because somebody with the same mechanism of action can't come into the market and try to take our market. So that's important. NV354 was a little bit early, so we looked forward to filing for ODD designation for that program as well. And then there are another couple of kind of tools you can use here in this space as well with fast track designation and breakthrough designation as well. So we're trying to make sure the assets have every opportunity to be successful. And I think both the robust patent estate and the ODD designation really helps us do that.
And then as a final question, how would you describe Abliva's current financial position?
Right. Thanks for that question. So as of June, we had about 90 million SEK on the books, and that's focused mainly on the development of KL1333. The nice thing about the strategy that we've undertaken is that we've started working on the KL1333 global program already through a startup agreement with the CRO. And so that allowed us to start doing a lot of stuff on this global study as we progress and as we raise financing. So we have communicated to the market that we're looking for about $30 to $40 million to fund KL1333 and get it to regulatory approval.
Well, thank you so much for the Q&A and for the presentation.
Thanks, Cecilia. It's always fun to see you.